background is with the private sector. I started work as an engineer, moved up through the ranks in the company, a company called Radio Communications Nigeria Limited. I moved up and became the engineering manager in the company. Then I was offered employment at the then GEC Telecommunications Nigeria Limited as engineering manager. So I moved from RCN to GEC Telecom and rose through the ranks to become the managing director of that company. And I was MD of the company for 11 years before I moved. I was invited to government to head the Nigerian Communications Commission. I was there for 10 years, 2 terms of 5 years each, and subsequently, at the end of my tenure, my second tenure, I left meritoriously and went back to the private sector. And 8 years later, became the chairman of MTN Communications Nigeria PLC. So that's basically the background. Like I said before, I was invited to join the Nigerian Communications Commission. Before then, I had known about the NCC. As you might know, the NCC started from an office in Lagos, somewhere in Victoria Island, until it was during the Babangida regime that many government offices were moved to Abuja when Abuja became the federal capital territory of the country. So NCC was one of those companies that moved. Of course, I was not there at the time, but I used to give speeches at Telecom events as MD of GEC. And I was also always very interested in telecom development in the country, because in those days, Nigeria was very far behind. Many countries like even Cameroon, Ghana, they had already gotten GSM services, and Nigeria was still not there. Nigeria will continue to be dealing with analog mobile services. And it was worrisome to some of us who were in the industry. And so there were a number of seminars that were organized by the management of the NCC at that time, both in Lagos and Abuja. And I used to be part of those that were invited to speak. And little did I know that I would eventually be invited to head the organization. So when I got there, I had a fair idea of what the organization looked like. But I was surprised at how scanty the staffing was in the commission. And they used to joke that the NCC in those days had 1.5 engineers because there were just a few, there was few staff, a number of lawyers, economists, admin people, but hardly technical people in an environment that is technology intensive, you know. So that was my first surprise, and immediately I thought it would be my first job to make sure that the place was properly staffed with the right set of people that would make the change that I wanted to make. My vision was fairly simple and straightforward. Because I knew Nigeria was lagging behind, the number of mobile services in the country was just about 20,000 lines in a whole country like Nigeria. The fixed lines were just about 400,000. And these were mostly in offices and hardly in people's homes. So my main vision was to give telecom services to all Nigerians. That was basically what I thought as my vision when I started at the NCC. Okay, there are many challenges. First of all, like I said, there were few staff, not well motivated, and coming from the private sector, I was not happy with the work ethics, the way they took work. And luckily for me, I had a good board of directors or commissioners, because I must give kudos to the president at the time. He was very, how do I put it, intentional about making sure that the board of the NCC is well set up with the right caliber of people. So I had a number of people who were ex-NITEL, a few people from the private sector, fairly knowledgeable people in the things concerning telecom services and the like. And we also had a very experienced person as chairman, Ahmed Joda, who had also been in public service and later retired, went into the private sector. So he had a lot of private sector credentials. He knew what works in an environment and what was needed to make a change. So we worked as a team, and the challenge was to build a very strong set of staff for the commission. So we set out to invite people from both the public and private sector to apply. And one thing that was obvious was that the salary scale of this public service at that time was very low. So we went to the president and told him that, look, this is a major parastatal of government that will be overseeing and supervising the telecom sector. And telecom sector will be populated by people with deep pockets and staffing that are confident. And you need to build something similar in the public sector, especially in the regulatory area, to be able to supervise this business properly. So we were lucky. The president was very understanding and told us that we should go and review the salary scale of staff at the commission. And that's what we did. So armed with a good pay structure and incentives for staffing, we were able to attract professionals, both engineers, accountants, economists, even from the private sector. They were ready to join us. Many of them joked that since Ernest Ndukwe could leave the private sector to go to NCC, that it must be something good. So I got my accountant, for instance, from one of the companies in Lagos. We got engineers from various places. And so we solved the problem of staffing. The next challenge was the main thing we were called to do, which is to build a commission that will give licenses to telecom companies. Before I came, they had tried to license mobile operators because, like I said, the president was very clear in his mind what he wanted. So they had attempted to do a licensing process in 1999. Because when the president came in, the first thing he did was change the EVC of NCC at the time. And they brought somebody else who was from the Nigerian Ports Authority or something. And of course, that appointment did not hold water for a long time. And they decided that the place needed a change. So it was during that time that they attempted a licensing process for mobile operators. And it was devoid of what people call fairness and integrity. And there were so many complaints from all over the place. And the process was cancelled. So one of our main challenge was to make sure that we organized a transparent licensing process. So that challenge was there. So we had to now start building the building blocks for it. I identified the fact that the spectrum frequencies that is the lifeblood of telecom services, was not well organized at all. It was important to make sure that we had enough spectrum for operators. Operators that were licensed by the previous regime before President Obasanjo came in 1999. There were quite a number. They had spectrum, but not enough spectrum to enable them deliver the kind of service that was required. So, on that note, we now decided to look at the spectrum and make sure that the spectrum was free and unencumbered, that we were able to have enough spectrum chunks that will enable the operators deliver a very good service. So I worked then with the permanent secretary at the Ministry of Communications, who were the custodian of frequencies. I must mention here that Professor Barakindo, who was the permanent secretary in the ministry, was so cooperative, and we worked very well together to make sure that we looked at the spectrum bands, made sure that those who were occupying them were eased out because they were not really using them maximally. So we had an arrangement that freed up spectrum in the 800, 900 megahertz band and the 1800 megahertz band in order to enable us to provide the spectrum required for the services. So, armed with that, we now decided to appoint consultants to work with us to conduct a spectrum auction. We decided that the best way to do the spectrum sales without compromising anybody is by having an auction, which was the norm across the world at the time, whether in the US or UK or anywhere they want to do things fairly. It was by a competitive auction process. So we designed that process with the consultants, invited bidders, and by October of that year, I came in February. By October that year, we were ready with the bid documents that invited people to come in. And in order to make sure that it was not something that all and sundry will start to get involved in, because we were looking for real good companies to be part of that auction. We set an amount of $20 million as the entry point for people who would want to come for the spectrum bidding process. At the end of the day, there were 5 companies eventually that qualified. So we finished that and prepared the documents, and that is, I hope I'm not answering more than the question you've asked me. So we went all the way to now go for the spectrum auction in January, I think it was 17th of January 2001, when we have that auction process. So that is basically how we overcome some initial challenges. Okay, the defining moment for me was that spectrum auction, which happened in January 2001. Because it was so successful, it was the first time such a transparent auction process was conducted in Nigeria. There were no favorites. It was open. In fact, we conducted it at the Hilton in Abuja, and we made it such that every Nigerian, whether locally or internationally, were able to follow the process, because it lasted for about 2 days actually. They were able to follow the auction process. As the auction was going on, the results were being announced and it was being published on the internet for everybody to see. So it was so interesting that after the auction, people started calling the president, other leaders across the world, calling him to congratulate him on the success of the auction. So when we were doing it, we didn't know that it will attract so much international attention. That's why it's so important when you're getting involved in anything, just be sure that people are watching. And it could be people who are not necessarily within your jurisdiction, who are hoping that this time around Nigeria will do it right. So they congratulated the president for a great auction process. And the bidders who bidded in the auction were all happy. Those who lost felt they were treated fairly and hardly any complaints from anybody. And I think that's, for me, was the defining moment of my tenure, because having licensed these operators, we are now in a position to start delivering services. And that was exactly what happened, because they were given a deadline to start operating after a certain number of months. So I think they had 6 months. So by August, the first set of lines, GSM lines, started rolling out. And the rollout was so fast that the operators rolled out more lines in 2 years than they were predicted to do in 5 years. Because the right operators were licensed and they had paid good money for the license, so they had the responsibility to make sure they built networks in order to recoup their investment. So they were just pushing in investment into the sector. And before you knew it, the lines grew from the 400 to 20,000 lines that we had to 1 million, 2 million, 5 million. And I think today we have over 100 million lines in the country. So that was really the defining moment. Licensing operators in a transparent manner and getting them to deliver the services they were licensed to do. I think doing things right is very important. Honesty of purpose, honesty of intention is very critical for success in both the public and private sector. And quite honestly, why sometimes it seems that private sector succeeds better than the public sector is that there is that strictness in the management process that when you're not performing, you are aware that you're not performing. And people do not employ on sentimental reasons. In the public sector, there are certain things that make it difficult for people to perform. Accountability is an issue. People think they have a job for life. So sometimes they come late to work, they don't deliver on the assignments they are given and things like that. But it is such, being in the public service is such an important assignment. I'll tell you something, before I joined the public sector, I used to wonder what goes on there. And in fact, after I joined, I wasn't really calling myself a civil servant or a public servant. But after my first tenure as Chief Executive of NCC, I was actually proud to be called a public servant. The reason is that when I was in the private sector, my assignment was to do the job to the best of my ability, such that I am able to deliver results for my shareholders and get them profit and dividend. And it was a restricted attention to the shareholders of that company. But when you're in the public service, your actions affect the nation. If you're in federal public service, the things you do affect the whole of the Nigerian nation. If you're in the state public service, what you do would affect the good of that state. One decision you make wrongly can throw many things off balance. So the fact that when we got there, we had the intention of building something that will deliver telecom services to Nigeria is something that I never imagined would have the kind of impact it had. But that was it. I couldn't have done that in the private sector. So public service is a very highly responsible job and must not be taken lightly. And that is why I would actually suggest that a lot of orientation is done with our public sector people, pointing out to them the implication of their not doing their jobs well. And that also includes making sure that they're also well compensated. Because quite honestly, if you pay very poor wages, you have problem with people being responsible and being focused on the job they're doing because they're busy looking for how to make a living instead of focusing on their primary job. And this question of over-employing, having too many people in some organizations in government, you have situations where 10 people are doing jobs that 2 or 3 people can do. People are just employing. And when you have too many people, idleness comes and you're not motivated enough because you're not busy. You're not really building yourself up. So these are the issues. So I hope I've answered your question about that. That it is important that in the public service, people realize the importance of the job they are called to do, and that those who are in the supervisory level, the permanent secretaries, the directors, and deputy directors, assistant directors, must see to it that they make sure that those who work there work with integrity, with honesty, and that we downplay very bad traits of tribalism, sectionalism, nepotism, all these things that actually draw people back instead of encouraging them to perform to their best. Yes, it's a good question. I went in there armed with a private sector background. I was MD of a company for 11 years. I knew exactly how to manage people and resources. I had said that I was lucky that I was given free hand to employ a new set of people. So what I did was that I set new ground rules for employment. We had IQ tests and we had normal job interviews. We don't just take somebody because somebody said you should take. So, and you have to be strict about some of these things, otherwise you have a problem. So we had a way of bringing in people. And when you bring the right set of people, they work. Because the challenge many people have in public service is that people will send you CVs of their wives, their children, their relatives, and they expect you to employ them automatically. But I didn't do that. I would take the CVs in order not to be rude. I will also try to be honest with them and put them through our normal interview process when the vacancies come. Those of them who are good would scale through and get into the commission. Those who are not good enough would fall by the wayside. That's the way we did it. And by so doing, we made sure that people had minimum standards that they had to meet to be able to work in such an environment. I also told you that we employed accountants and things from even the private sector. When I got to the NCC, I noticed that the annual accounts were behind by 5 years. And there is a requirement for parastatals like ours to submit their audited financial statements to the Office of the Accountant General by June of every year. The one at the NCC at the time was 5 years behind. So I called the then accountant. I asked him, what's going on? He was saying things that didn't make sense to me. I told him that I wanted those things brought up to date immediately. After a month or so, it was still not done. I decided that I needed a new accountant. So first of all, we got an accounting firm to come in, clean the books, bring the accounts up to date, because I wanted to start on a clean sheet. And that was exactly what happened. We brought the accounts up to date. And I immediately interviewed and got a new accountant. Luckily, the person came from the private sector. And she was there till I left, actually. She performed very well as our CFO throughout that period. She knew how to use accounting software. We had to buy new software for the accounts department because I was very conscious of integrity of whatever reports we are going to give out. So from that next year after I came in till I left, NCC submitted accounts to the Accountant General's Office, Auditor General's Office, punctually every year as required by law. So that is the way things should be done. And you can dictate what you do. And many of these heads of organizations that are giving excuses for not performing to certain standards, they are just excuses. Because when you're the chief executive of an organization, you should be able to have the free hand to do one or two things that stand you out as somebody who has honesty of intentions. And that is it. So we, in running public sector institutions, once you have that intention to be fair and honest and straightforward, you can make it happen. Let me not say that I didn't have my own challenges. I was there for 10 years. I think I must have, during that period, maybe up to 5 ministers, because they come and go as regimes change. There was a time you had minister and the minister of state. And of course, many of them had political leanings and they also had an idea of what they want, what they are looking for. But I must say that I worked with all of them to the best of my ability. I had one in particular that was a problem, which I stood my ground and said that this is the only way to do things that I know. But the other ones, we had mutual respect for each other, and we worked very well together. We also had challenges with dealing with other external agencies, which I don't necessarily want to mention names and things like that. Some were expecting you to do certain things you don't want to do. But the idea is to stand your ground, do things to the best of your ability, and another point I want to make is that if you have the backing of the president of the country, you can actually do a good job. Because sometimes people succumb to pressures because the powers that be are not given the right direction and the right, what shall I call it, the right instructions to those under them. Once the number one, number two, number three are in the right direction, you can actually stand your ground and know that you're protected from those other people who might want to influence you negatively. But generally, I think when you want to do things right, you can do it right. Internal resistance is, I must confess that I didn't have much of internal resistance. Like I said, the organization was a very small organization when I took it over, and I actually built it up. By the time I left, there were about 300 members of staff from 60 that I met. So obviously, many of the people there were carefully selected and chosen. And we had good remuneration package. We made provision for housing and things like that. So I don't think I had too much of internal resistance. Maybe you might even talk about resistance from other commissioners, but I didn't have much of that we couldn't handle because I had a very good chairman of the board who gave free hand for us to perform and was a bit of a person that would be able to douse tensions when they arise from time to time. But for external pressures, I think I've said something about it briefly, that some ministers would like you to do certain things. There's one joke of one minister that said, how can the minister's candidate not pass the interview? Like I said, we had a strict interview process, and some of the candidates that were brought in from his office did not pass the interview and therefore were not taken. So some people expect because they are ministers, therefore anybody they tell you to employ, you employ. But that didn't happen during my tenure. So we had external pressures from also from organizations like the National Assembly, other ministries. People will always send CVs to you. So if you don't have vacancy, you don't employ. It's a different thing that happened subsequently after I left. But it was important that one maintain some strict adherence to certain principles. So if there is no vacancy, you tell the person honestly that we're not employed at this time. So those pressures will die off immediately because nobody can force you to take in somebody when there is no desk for the person to use. So that is the thing about external pressures. Apart from that, we worked very well with the people at the presidency. We worked very well with the people at the security agencies. So the pressures were not such that we couldn't handle. I think it goes back to being able to explain the vision of the organization well to members of staff and know exactly, for them to know exactly what their assignment is and what they must do to make sure that things work well. And once the results started coming, people were happy. NCC staff had their shoulders high because they could see the result of their actions and the fact that the country was growing subscriber base in leaps and bounds. And it was important for us to focus on making sure that we enabled private sector. Because one thing that sometimes people don't understand about the job of the regulator, the job of regulator is not to wield the big stick. Remember that the only reason why regulators exist is because there are operators. When there was just NITEL, there was no need for a regulatory agency because just one company, anything they liked, they did and all that. But because of that, we were laggards as far as our nation was concerned in terms of telecom services, because there was no competition and people were appointed based on who they know and things like that. So it was a big problem. So when you now have a situation where you have professional people in the organization and they're able to do the job to the best of their ability, once you're able to explain the vision of the organization and they're able to follow through, then you have things going well in that direction. The achievements from my tenure that still resonate is the fact that the NCC is still strong. I think after me, they now have the third EVC, who is doing very well. The fact that a solid foundation was built for the commission made it possible for the Commission to continue to do well even today. They are known for professionalism. They are known for doing things right. They're able to look operators in the eye and tell them, this is what we want you to do. They are well trained. We spent a lot of money ensuring international training for members of staff of the NCC. So that has rubbed off very well in the ability to do the job they are doing of regulating the industry. Up till today, the networks are still growing. So I think those are the legacies of the past that have continued to be there up till today. I suspect that they are still employing based on merit. That's very important. They must make sure that they have the highest caliber of staff in the organization, because they are dealing with the private sector that are wearing the shoes and they know exactly what the latest technology is. So the NCC also needs to be well informed. They need to be well staffed with the right caliber of people that understand the industry and be able to provide the regulatory supervision that is required. If they are not knowledgeable, they will not be able to do a good job. So I hope they're still ensuring that staff are well trained and they're exposed internationally, especially the technical staff, and they attend international conferences and meetings and exhibitions, because that's when they actually learn a lot of what is going on around the world and what the latest technologies are, because they must be able to translate it into what the local operators are doing in Nigeria. Good question. The role of the Communications Commission is so critical. Because ICT is something that rules the world today. We can't be in isolation. We are talking about fourth industrial revolution. We are lucky that at least we've been able to do well with the second and third industrial revolution. Though we must say that one thing that affects our ability to embrace these revolutions well, one very important aspect is electricity. We still don't have enough and pervasive electricity generating and distribution and access to all Nigerians. In the fact that 24-hour electricity is something that is taken for granted in nearly all nations of the world today. I'm talking about the second industrial revolution. It's also surprising that today in Nigeria, I'm sorry I'm deviating from telecom, to talk about the fact that there is no city in Nigeria today that has potable water that is all over the city, where you can turn your tap and water starts running out. I think that's the biggest failing of subsequent or successive governments in this country, because this is so basic. It doesn't matter how remote the village is in Nigeria. You must have water from the tap, from well. Even in the desert in Dubai, in the desert in Saudi Arabia, they have tap water. Even in the 100 and something story buildings, they open tap and there's water. Not to talk of electricity. It's so important that we do that. So I think that we just have to continue to do our best. In the telecom area, the regulator is very important in pushing development in the industry. The more the regulator realizes that it's their responsibility to make sure that every village in Nigeria has access to telecom services, and finding out what they can do with the operators to make sure that those services get to those places, and that they also monitor service quality, they also monitor pervasiveness of the facility. Is so important. I want to seize the opportunity to also talk about where I mentioned about electricity supply. Quite honestly, I think that tariff of electricity supply is overregulated in Nigeria. The first thing is to leave tariff. Let electricity come. Because electricity, I can control the number of bulbs in my house. But I want electricity to be there for that one bulb that I'm using. I don't need to have 20 bulbs like what I have in the office here. But I want when I put on a switch, so I can control my consumption based on my income. But don't limit my access. And when we say regulate that aspect, then you must make it as a rule that every subscriber must have a meter that meters the consumption. All these things about the estimated billing should disappear, but every house is metered, every flat is metered, and so that you charge according to consumption. People can regulate their consumption so that the investment will pour in and provide that service all over the place. Then we know we're in business for the third and fourth industrial revolution. Without electricity, we are wasting our time. It's so important. So also telecom services. we're talking about today data centers. Data centers are guzzlers of electric power. For the next generation of data centers all over the world, you need constant electricity at good availability rates. So all these things, they are interconnected. That's why when I talk about telecom, I also talk about electricity supply. Because in Nigeria here, for instance, when we started, I know one operator that decided they wouldn't even connect to the national grid. They provided their own electricity supply throughout. Today is a combination for many of the operators. But that should not be the case. You know, that's not the case in South Africa. Many of all the operators depend on the national grid for supply to their base stations. So also in many countries of the world. Nobody, you put generator as standby, not the main supply. So these are the issues that we need to look at. We just need to continue to do what we need to improve. The reforms that are needed, I think I've actually covered a number of that in my earlier statements, that the first thing is for the regulator to realize that it's an enabler. And the regulator I'm talking about today is not just the NCC, because in our business, there are other regulatory bodies that also look at what we do. For instance, FCCPC, of course the NCC, NITDA, other agencies that get involved, those who approve, this organization that approves towers, where towers are sited, the Environmental Commission, I've forgotten what they're called. All these things, all those people, they need to realize that their primary job is enabling businesses to thrive and succeed. Because if they've died, then there is nobody to regulate. So the important thing is to realize that it's important that it's a win-win situation between the regulator and the regulated. So that is the main reform I think is so critical for the future. That people must realize that people invest, and the only way that people can continue to invest is by making profit and continue to build networks. If you stop building networks, quality of service will deteriorate. If you don't approve a tower location in a city, quality of service will decrease. If you don't approve right of way for installing optic fiber cables, then you don't have the best service for broadband. So all these things are related. And then electricity needs to be there in a pervasive way for all around the country to make it easier for both, not just telecom, but other businesses to be able to succeed. And I'd like to see the revolution that happened in the telecom industry to also happen in the power sector, because we need electricity. Even for telecom services, we need electricity in a very big way. What I could have done differently is not getting worried when I receive pressures from various people to do what I don't want to do. Because, or what I didn't want to do, not what I don't want to do. Because in those days, it used to worry me a lot. And worrying does not solve problems. It's better to face the issue directly and solve it. But I was also very bold during my tenure. And I was ready to argue with some of those people that were ahead of me on certain principles that I believed in. And I stood my ground. So that was a good thing. But sometimes I felt downcast because of the kind of worry you get from people here and there. But why I said that I would have done it differently by not worrying is that at the end of the day, I did what I was supposed to do, and they left me alone. You know, got my second term approved and did my full 10 years with the NCC. So if I was to do it again, I probably would have worried less than I did. Secondly, I think that I spent a lot of time working. Perhaps it's possible that my family suffered a bit during that period because I faced, because NCC was at a building stage, it was almost a 24/7 operation for me. I dreamt of it, thought about it, worked on it, and we just continued innovating and coming out with new things. And that's why we won Africa Award many times, our best regulators and all that. So I put in a lot of attention in that direction in running that organization. Thank God we succeeded, but it's also possible that family paid a price. It was actually at the period when my children were getting into universities and all that. I'm sure if you ask them, they will tell you that I didn't visit them enough, or I didn't accompany them to a few places, or taking them on holiday enough. But I'm sure they've forgiven me for that. And by God's grace, they all turned out well. So we thank God for that. So that's apart from that, for the work itself, I'm not sure there is anything I would have done differently. We took our time to follow processes, and learned a lot from international organizations and did a lot of understanding of what happened in other climes. And so anytime we came out with a guideline or licensing process, it was out of a deliberate research and coming out with the right processes to follow. I guess this is not just for the government. We're talking about leaders in the telecom industry. The important thing is to realize that it's a very fast-changing industry. It is also important to realize that knowledge base is important. So being leaders is important to ensure that we continue to embrace new thoughts, new ways of doing things, new technologies, and adapt it for the local environment. I think in Nigeria, a number of companies have done well. One thing that is noticeable is that companies that have succeeded are those who are run with integrity and those who are run with governance principles in place. For instance, in the industry today, we've had successes with two of the companies have done very well. The third company is also trying. The fourth company is almost requiring support. So it's important that governance principles are adhered to. And people must make sure they do things the right way. Work with the regulators to ensure that services are provided to all and sundry. I've also already talked about advice to the regulators to ensure that they realize that the companies are there to deliver service and that the regulators exist because there are companies to regulate. When companies die off, then there's nobody to regulate. So it's in the interest of everybody that everybody works well. Whether regulator or the operator, I always say that the regulator's role is on a tripod. They have to look after government policies and translate those policies to their regulations and what they do. One other leg is the consumer. They need to protect the consumer, make sure the consumer gets value for money. It's very important. They must get value for whatever they pay for. And the third tripod is the operating companies, because they must succeed in order for the regulator to have a job to do. If you kill all your operators, then you don't have a job and there will be no consumer. So there are three of them are, and the government provides the enabling environment. So it's actually a question of people helping each other. It's not me alone, no. The tripod must work together in order for success to be achieved in a particular environment. And of course, the industry depends also on other things. Government processes. For instance, one area that is very important is getting right of way to install towers and underground cable or cable over transmission lines. All those things are important, and government needs to be able to enable those things to happen in order to make them succeed. Good question. I think ethics is paramount. For success of any organization, ethical values must be pursued very strongly. Don't cut corners. Don't do things because it favors you alone. You must be fair to all concerned and do things properly. I believe very much in ethics and integrity. That should be the watchword for any public servant. And in fact, anybody, even in the private sector, in order for our country to grow and succeed. So that would be my general advice in that area. Honest. I want to believe that if you have honesty of intention, honesty of purpose, honesty in your dealing with your fellow human beings, honesty in the results you publish, honesty in your dealing with your shareholders and your stakeholders. That has been my guiding principle. And with honesty comes ethics. With honesty comes integrity. So if you ask for that one word, I'll just say it's honesty. I'm not sure I have any book or mentor. I'm not sure I do have a book or mentor. There are obviously people that I admire in terms of their capacity to make things happen. I will say that our former president, President Obasanjo, I liked his honesty of intention for the telecom industry, because he never wavered throughout the time I was there. He left office in, I think, 2007 or so. For that period he was there, I was with him from 2000 to that time. never wavered. And he was always looking for how to support and make sure that we succeeded in what we were doing. So he might be regarded as one of my mentors in terms of looking up to. Because sometimes when I went to him and complained about the kind of pressures I was getting, he said, leave them alone. Just go and do your work. Make sure you do your work properly. He also told me something that I'll never forget. He said that though I reported to a minister that he likes to be briefed, and he said that he can only be under-briefed, he cannot be over-briefed. And I've used that in my dealings with many of my subordinates as I continued my trajectory, that leaders like to get briefings. So I learned that from him, and I've used it well in other places that I've been. I've had to who else? I will also say that my former chairman, Ahmed Jordan, was also a mentor. I was lucky to have had him as chairman of the company. He was not overbearing. He gave you a free hand. He knew the job of the chairman and the job of the CEO of organization. And we worked very well throughout. And God bless his soul, because he passed on a few years ago. But he was a very strict person in terms of discipline, and also had honesty of intentions and honesty of purpose. I think those are the two people I would like to talk about that have influenced my thinking and my actions. Of course, my biggest influence came from my experience in the private sector, managing a private sector organization that had an international flair, and the fact that strict adherence to governance was the watchword at that level, and that helped shape my thinking and the way I perform my tasks. I think the biggest leadership lesson is that you must walk the talk. If you want people to do well, you must show the example. You know, I laugh sometimes when people talk about corruption and they themselves are corrupt. I laugh when people are badly behaved and they talk about people behaving well. People must walk their talk. The biggest lesson that has led to what we did at the NCC is that we showed examples of integrity and how to do things right. And it permeated through the organization and delivered the results that we were looking for. And that has continued with me into the other private sector places that I've gotten involved with. I had a stint at the Lagos Business School as a faculty, and Lagos Business School is high on creating oasis of sanity wherever you are to make sure things are done properly. I think that's important. Eventually, I joined the board of the NCC and became its chairman. Board of MTN, sorry. MTN is also a company that is based on very strict principles of governance, and that's been the secret of the success they've achieved over the years, because they have processes, governance processes that are well laid out, and people are not in doubt about the direction they want to go or the direction that the leadership is going. So those are very important. That it reminds me of the motto of the West African pilot that Zeke set up in his heydays. The motto says, show the way, show the light, and the people will find the way. That is very important, that leaders show the light. Leaders walk the talk so that people will find a way, so that people will follow in their footsteps. My advice to public sector professionals is just repeating what I said earlier. Realize that you're not working for yourself. Public service is work for the nation, for the state, or for the local government, or for the parastatal. You're working to impact lives, not just your life. You're not working for your pocket. You're delivering policies. You're making decisions for the nation. So it's a very, in fact, it's much more important than private sector responsibility. Public sector responsibility is so important. And that's why it's just like, let me deviate and talk about political leaders. And I'd like to encourage young people of today who have ethics and integrity to join politics. Why? It's politics that appoints the ministers. Politics appoints the president. Politics appoints members of the judiciary. Politics appoints directors in ministries and parastatals. Politics appoints permanent secretaries. Politics appoints, in fact, the governors and the rulers of various levels of the society. So when people say that politics is a game, I say no, politics is not a game. It's a very serious business. People should be encouraged who have the mind to work to change the country, should aspire to go into politics and even the public service and give their quota. Like I said, I think the 10 years I did in the public service has been the most important 10 years of my life. And I guess it might be the same for many people who went there to deliver certain results. So, for future leaders who want to go to public service, just know that it is to change lives. Not these days where people talk about people from their ethnic group, people from their sectional groups, as if that is what they've gone to public service to do. Public service is to enhance humanity, to help the country to become good, to help the country to move from a third world to a first world country, not to stay where it is and you leave it worse than where we met it. So, like I said, decisions in a public sector space affects the country. So, you must take those decisions with responsibility and with intention to make a positive change in the society. To strengthen public institutions, I think the bottom line is to appoint the right people to the positions. I was proposing, because I belong to an organization today, Center for Public Sector Governance. The idea is to ensure that the public sector is governed at the highest level of efficiency and integrity. And it starts from appointing who is on that seat. Somebody on TV recently pointed out that when they were looking for governor of central bank in the UK some time ago, they actually interviewed, and the person that got the interview was a Canadian. A Canadian was appointed as governor of Central Bank of England. There was also a time an African was the head of the regulatory agency, Ofcom, in the UK. People look out for the best hands they can get. It's so important that we play our matches with our first 11. So, in the parastatals and many of these big agencies, when it's time to appoint the DG or the CEO, let's go through an interview process. Let the best hands be appointed. That's not jettisoning the issue of I don't like using the word quota. I like using, being sensitive to the diversity. I like using the word diversity. Because quota sounds very entitled. And that is not what I mean. If we have a position that is to be filled, let people interview for it. Even if you want it from a particular part of the country, let there be interview. Bring many people from that part of the country that would. So you choose the best. Not just somebody you just wake up one day and say, it should be this person. And they start learning on the job. And by the time you know it, another regime has come out and the person has floundered and messed up. Once we start appointing the right people to man critical organizations in the country, this country will move. Another controversial thing that people, or something that people might consider controversial. The world lives in a plural society today. There are many people who were born in Nigeria who are not necessarily from any of our tribal groups. They might be white people, they might be Lebanese, they might be Indian, that have Nigerian passport and born here. Nothing stops them from being appointed to governance positions in our country. This question of it must come from this place or that, we need to change it. After all, our people go abroad, they become mayors of certain places in England, in America, in Canada. Why are we restricting other people from assuming positions here if they are Nigerians? Nigerians, you don't need to be black to be a Nigerian. If you're born in Nigeria, whether you're white or Hispanic or anything, you are Nigerian. And when we start mixing in governance all these things, because you use the best you can get from anywhere. And we need to start seeing the same plural arrangement that Nigeria, there was a time the best heart surgeon in the UK was an Egyptian. Nigeria here, we do quota system even in selection of doctors. How can you select a doctor by quota system? You're looking for the best surgeon you can get. You're looking for the best doctor you can get. How can you select mathematics teacher by quota? Then you don't want good training for your children. You should go out and get the maths teacher from anywhere that has the best credentials to train the children. That's why our educational system is so poor. Some of the teachers need to be students themselves in many of the schools that we have all over the country. We are not selecting. We take this quota system too far, that we are blinded so much. There was a time Nigerians were chief justices of countries like Gambia, Uganda. They had doctors from Nigeria in many of those places. Even today in South Africa, many Nigerians are doctors in the place. Why are we so into ourselves? And that's why Nigeria is not progressing. Nigeria needs to embrace people from diverse backgrounds. We need to see that plurality. Then, because that's the way the world is today, we need to make sure that we're embracing people from diverse backgrounds, people from other countries who are, if it's government, who are Nigerians. Once they have a Nigerian passport, they can be elected, they can be appointed. If that particular position requires the person to be a Nigerian. But not for us to say, oh, it must be from this ethnic group or from that ethnic group. No. We need to get the best people to man our various organizations, especially in our public service, because they're even more important than private sector appointments, because they change the fortunes of the country. And if you have the wrong person on the seat, that place will be non-performing until that person is changed. Well, I think to wrap up, I will just emphasize again that public service is a very high service that must be taken seriously by anybody who finds himself there. You must first of all ask, what difference would I make in this my position? What would I be remembered for? How would Nigeria be a better place? And I repeat, Nigeria, not my section of the country. Many times in Nigeria, people are being boxed to their state. I don't want to be boxed to my state of origin. I'm a Nigerian. It's funny, like somebody like Buhari, after serving the country in the military, in government as president, and he dies, and we are talking about he may be being buried is only his people. National figure. These people have ceased becoming sectional leaders. It's like what I heard somebody talk the other day. Every time you say North is being not treated well, South is not. These are people who are supposed to be national figures. Let's talk Nigeria. How do we build an inclusive society? How do we build society where everybody has a say and has a feeling of being part of the country? And we had this in Nigeria before. We had this in Nigeria, where people moved from various parts of the country, settled, and lived happily without any problem. Let's stop boxing ourselves to certain state of origin, this, that. That is unnecessary. If we want to be Nigerian, let's be Nigerian. In America, for instance, Bill Clinton was governor of Arkansas. When his wife was going to contest for Senate, He was contested for Senate in New York. He didn't go to Arkansas or look for some state of origin. This is what politicians use to confuse people all over the place. The ordinary Nigerians need somebody who can deliver him from poverty. And he might not be the person from his town. He might not be the person from his village. Because that person from his village had tried before and failed. You need to get people with. And there are people who are created to be innovative. And you can find them from all over the place. So, I need to see us come together as a country, as one, and let's stop boxing ourselves to sectional areas. There are leaders in this country who still, each time, are looking for boxing themselves to an area. And that brings me to some of these road constructions that we do. When you build Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, you're not building it for the West. You're building it for Nigeria. Because that is the way people pass, whether they're going to north, east, or west from Lagos. When you build a road from Shagamu to Benin, you're not building it for people in Shagamu or Benin. You're building it for the nation because everybody goes through that road. Nobody stops you and says, "Where are you from?" You can't pass because you're from here. And that's why sometimes people start taking ownership of roads around their place, when actually roads are for the use of all and sundry, including visitors from outside Nigeria. Everybody uses the road. And that blinds us from doing the best we can for roads. When you build a road between Abuja and Kaduna, it's for everybody. You need for it to be in good shape. If you build a road between Lokoja and Benin, between Abuja and Benin, everybody who is going to Lagos, who is going to the east, they all pass through that Lokoja road to where they are going. Each time we are boxing ourselves to certain things. And you say, that's why when Britain is looking at budget for London, they're not looking for who is an indigene of London. Because that is the capital. Nobody talks about indigene, all these things we use to confuse ourselves. Let's build. Lagos is a commercial capital. Federal government should pour in money to make sure Lagos is built well, because it has all the major ports in the country and it needs special allocation of funds for it to do well. So also the ports in other parts of the country needs to be funded so that people can move easily. It's not for that particular area that you're funding. So all this boxing people to certain parts of their country is a bad thing for this country. Let's open up. Let's put money in places. Let's build the whole country together. Let every place. I went to Switzerland recently and we had a function, a training in a very small village called Arenenberg. It's like a village in any part of the country. The only difference is that the roads are narrower, but they are completely tarred. Water runs. Electricity is all over the place. They have police. They have security. Village, which is quite a distance from Zurich. That's the dream I have for this nation, where every small village, some time ago I went to Mambila Plateau. Nigeria doesn't know what it has. It's such a serene environment, it's unbelievable. But tomorrow somebody will now say that they own it. That's why it's not developed up to today. Otherwise, that place should be a major tourist attraction in this country. You need to see the serenity of that place. And there are many places like that in this country. Let's open up our country. Let's make it a better place for everybody. Whether public service or private sector, let's work together as one to build our nation. That's my closing remarks.